Threads of the Past, written by Tanisha Ingram, narrated by Kim Pfeifer. The fabric had a memory, and it was screaming. Brooklyn McLay pressed her fingertips into the denim patchwork crop jacket of her father's last design. The two-piece, a monument to his genius, hung like a forgotten galaxy in the center of his studio. To anyone else, it was a masterpiece, a cascade of stars and shadows, but to her, it was a history she could feel under her skin. She traced a seam and felt the ghost of his hands, the weary sigh he made when a stitch was perfect, the quiet determination that had built an empire from nothing. A bitter, cold sensation came next, the final panicked moment before his last breath on December 13th, 2016, a year after she graduated high school, a memory of a feeling. Her stepfather's voice, a steady river of scripture, broke the dream cloud. "That's a beautiful piece, Brooklyn, but it's just an outfit. You can't live in the past." The preacher stood in the doorway, a solid, unmoving shadow in a crisp white shirt. He wasn't malicious, not openly. He simply saw her father's legacy as a gilded cage, and her love for it as a spiritual burden. He always seemed to come in the studio and pray over it, like it was a spiritual warfare only he knew about. Her dad had promised her mother a world free of her husband's sins and a life of simple, unadorned truth, and he promised Brooklyn the same thing. He took a step into the studio, and the air shifted, turning thin and sterile. "Your father's life was chaotic, child. I want to teach you to live calmly." He started to pray. Brooklyn's hand tightened on the materials, and the fabric hummed, pulling her back. She was 5 years old, sitting on the floor of the studio, a vivid universe of fabrics and light. Her father knelt beside her, a bolt of silk in his hands. "Look, Brooklyn," he whispered, his voice a low rumble. "This isn't just silk. This is a story. Can you feel it?" He guided her tiny fingers to the smooth material, and she concentrated, feeling only the cool smoothness. "You have to listen," he said, a smile in his voice. "This one's a first kiss, soft and a little bit shy." She closed her eyes, and for the first time felt the flutter of a memory she hadn't lived by herself. She giggled. "It tickles," she whispered. The memory slipped away. The preacher was still talking, but his words were a distant hum. "My father's life was a masterpiece," she wanted to shout. She knew the preacher meant well, that he saw the fashion world as a trap. He saw the sequins, the velvet, and the gold lame as the trappings of sin, and the sorrow in her eyes as something to be prayed away. But a life of calm was a life with no storms, and her storm was what made her who she was. Her past wasn't a sin to be cleansed. It was a ghost to be understood, and she was not yet ready to forget. "Hey, baby girl," her mom, a fair-skinned, toned, shorter lady said, walking into the studio. Brooklyn turned to her mom and waved and walked out. "Hi, Mom," she mumbled, walking past her mom to her room. "What did I miss?" her mother asked her husband, giving him a kiss on the cheek. "You know Brooklyn just in Lynn's studio daydreaming again about this fashion world stuff," he said with a malicious smile, rolling his eyes. "Well, I wouldn't be so quick to shut down her ideas," her mom responded, walking to Brooklyn's room. She began to knock. All she heard blasting was "I'm the Best" by Nicki Minaj. She tried knocking again. She decided to call her instead. The music instantly stopped. "Yes, Mom." Brooklyn picked up, flopping on her king-size princess-style bed. "Open the door." Her mom replied, knocking on the door. Brooklyn opened her double-room door to let her mom in. Her mom followed. "What are you listening to?" she asked, looking around the room. "Nicki, of course, to get my creative juices flowing," Brooklyn said with a slight attitude. "Are you almost ready for your college touring day?" her mother asked. "Yes, ma'am," Brooklyn said, grabbing her book bag and walking to her car. "Love you too," her mom whispered, closing her door. "Love you, Mom," she responded, knowing her mom said it low, but loud enough. She heard. She got into her jet black 2016 Nissan Altima with 5% tint, covered in Hello Kitty decor, from the steering wheel cover to the gas cap, which had a rhinestone Hello Kitty face on it. Heading out, 2 huge applewood tree-like black gates surrounded their house, sitting on about 3 acres of land. The gates automatically opened and closed behind her. She headed to pick up 2 of her friends. The girl's name was Tiana White, a tall, slimmer, brown-skinned young lady. The other was a boy who went by Cha, but his real name was Jeremy Stans. He was more on the heavier side, brown-skinned with a big personality. She picked them up. They only lived 1 road from each other. They headed to the college, blasting music and laughing. Pulling up into an orange and green-themed school with all of the other student drivers, Brooklyn parked in the first available spot. They sat in the car until their designated tour time. They walked to the main quad, where they were there to meet up with their tour group. While the group was large, Brooklyn and her friends, Tiana, Ashley, and Maya, gravitated toward each other. Brooklyn had always been drawn to fashion design, but her high school was in a small town with limited art programs. She had spent all 4 years in JROTC and had won writing awards, but she yearned for something different. She'd been a passionate writer since 5th grade, but her true first love was dance. "Welcome to Florida A&M University," the enthusiastic student guide announced. A long line of high school students stood ready to tour the campus. The guide led them to the School of Architecture and Engineering, showcasing the buildings and different programs. Some students started to lose interest and drift away. Brooklyn observed the impressive facilities, studying every detail, and eventually found herself daydreaming about being a student there. After the tour, the group received information on how to apply. Later that evening, Brooklyn rushed home to share the details with her mom. To no surprise, her mom wasn't home. She went to her room, shut the door, and pulled out her lavender journal. She didn't talk much about her feelings, but through her writing, she could paint a picture so vivid you could see it, taste it, and maybe even believe you were there. Brooklyn's journal. My college touring day was great. I wore a camouflage shirt from my dad's chosen collection, jorts and my favorite Sperry's. My dad would say my look was streetwear academia. After all the tours, I had to choose a major. I'm leaning toward the dance team, and the auditions I saw were funny. Some students left when they saw how complex the routines were. I've always been a dancer, but I'll take it. ROTC is great, but with a new chief, it's been interesting. I'm excited about this new chapter, but something still feels missing. Maybe it's because my mom is never home when I have good news, or maybe it's because all of her attention is on my brothers. As the only girl between an older and younger brother, I've always felt like the forgotten middle child. People think that because you can get whatever you want, you're set for life, but what you really need is love. A girl needs her mother to talk to without being judged. A girl needs a role model who loves her unconditionally like my dad. She needs her mom to be her biggest cheerleader, just like she is for my brothers. A girl needs someone to encourage her, to hold on when she feels lost and like letting go. Brooklyn started to draw and scribble with tears running down her face. In school and church, she was perfect to others. They loved her smile that could brighten up a room, her laugh that was contagious, her big but shy personality. But it seemed like at home, she couldn't get the time of day. They would think she locked herself in her room to daydream, but there was more behind the closing of the door. Behind that door was pain, sadness, loneliness, self-hatred, and an awareness of self-identity. So much more that was covered by a beautiful, bright smile. In other places, she covered her emotions with a mask of faith, but when she came home to those 4 walls, her world would shatter back to reality. "Honey?" Her mother called looking for her in her father's studio, but she wasn't there. Brooklyn was sound asleep after nearly crying herself to sleep. Her mother knocked on the door. Brooklyn jumped up, closing her journal and placing it back in her nightstand. "Yes, I was sleeping," Brooklyn finally answered in a sleepy, raspy voice, wiping her eyes. Her mother opened the door with Brooklyn's favorite chicken Alfredo and bread from Olive Garden. Brooklyn reached out her hands in excitement. "Thank you," she said, grabbing her food and drink. "Of course. Did you get to pick your last classes today?" her mother asked, watching her tear into her food. Brooklyn nodded. "Yes, I made the dance team," Brooklyn said with noodles hanging from her mouth. She didn't seem as excited as she first was when she found out. "I am so happy for you. Congratulations. Where are you going to be dancing?" she asked. Brooklyn gave a blank stare. "I'm not sure. I think basketball games," she responded. "Just give me the schedule. I will make what I can," her mother said, walking out of the room and shutting the door. Brooklyn knew her mom meant well, but she had never even come to watch Brooklyn play basketball in middle school. She played all 3 years, and her mom came to see her play once. Also, to her high school ROTC marching event, where she won Best Dressed in her uniform from an unknown captain in the Navy. Brooklyn finished half of her food, taking the leftovers to the refrigerator. She tried to tiptoe to the kitchen, but she couldn't help but notice her dad's studio door open. She put her container away and walked back to the studio. She entered the cold, silent, fabric-filled but empty studio. She walked around the room, her fingertips brushing against the variety of fabrics, the tip of the sewing machine, the edge of the model mannequin, pulling her back. "Booger nose," her dad said in a soft, funny voice, coming around the sharp corner. "You know how proud I am of you," he said, hugging her with a huge grin on his face. Brooklyn's face, confusion at this not being a memory. "You know I've always told you, when it comes to you, you have to make yourself happy. You cannot depend on other people for your happiness, or you will always be sad and let down," he said, giving a speech that sounded familiar. "Brooklyn, your mother and I love you, and I am sorry I am no longer with you, but you always have me in spirit. You can always come to this room and touch a fabric or two to let me know you're calling for your guardian angel," his softly spoken voice said as it started to vanish. Brooklyn cried, wishing she had just a little more time. She rushed to the fabric wall, rubbing every fabric she could find until it gave her a rug burn. She noticed it wasn't working, so she sat on the life-size beanbag across from the fabric wall, anxiously staring at the fabric in confusion. The preacher walked past the studio and doubled back. "Maybe that's why it didn't work," Brooklyn thought to herself, looking to the side and seeing her stepfather in a full dress suit to go to Bible study. "Hey, Blake and I are going to Bible study. Would you like to join?" he asked, stepping into the room. The room's air tightened. You could feel the atmosphere shift. Brooklyn looked up at him and then looked back at the fabric. "No, thank you," she responded in a low voice. "I think it would be great to get out of the studio for a change and explore your gifts in ministry," he suggested. "No, thank you," she repeated, getting up from the beanbag and walking to the sliding door of the studio. She turned off the lights behind her, waiting for him to leave so she could close the door and return to her room. Blake and his father left, leaving Brooklyn and her mother home. Their mother was in the kitchen cooking and getting some schoolwork done. Brooklyn, on the other hand, was contemplating whether she should go talk to her mother or just let it go. She paced her room back and forth. She built up the confidence to go talk to her mother, opened the door, and overheard her on the phone. She hurried and shut the door, flopping on her bed. Brooklyn pulled her journal back out, opening to the page she had just finished. The page was almost full, with a tear stain in the center. She rubbed her fingertips over the page, reminiscing on the time her dad came to her school for career day and told the class she would be the next big thing in fashion. She wanted to follow in his footsteps, but the fashion business world was harder than she thought. Brooklyn felt lost ever since she lost her father. He had the best life advice and wisdom, and he made it easy to choose a life path. His favorite line was, "If you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life," in his soft, loving, and nurturing voice. So she thought to herself what her passions were and what she was good at. She decided to turn the page in her journal, starting on a fresh page. She wrote in big bubble letters, "Passions and what I'm good at," then put a line down the middle, drawing a curved line under each topic. She wrote about her passions. Writing. I have been writing since I was in the 4th grade, and I have found a passion in expressing myself through my words and stories. On the other side, it read, "Of course, I am naturally good at this without question." Dance. I have been dancing since elementary school as well, but I never really got the opportunity to be on a dance team like I always wanted. I found a passion in dance, expressing myself through movement and music. The other side read, I am better with getting a dance and learning it than naturally creating a dance these days. Fashion. I have always loved to dress. I got this passion from my dad and mom. When I was younger, I would stay up all night playing styling games like Star Dolls, My Scene, and things like that. So I started getting into styling and styling my school outfits, cutting some clothes, getting in trouble, but I never really wanted to be a business owner like my father. I saw the stress, but I did think about having my own clothing brand one day and never really acted on it, just dreamed. This comes naturally with my personal style. Brooklyn paused, thinking to herself. She walked to her closet, looking at all of her clothes, then walked to her desk of writing materials, then over to her 4 full body-length mirrors in the corner of her room, like a mini dance studio. I have a lot of passions. I have to choose one to focus on and what I love, not to make anyone else happy or proud, but to find my true outlet and purpose on earth, she said to herself, looking in the mirror at her reflection. She went back to her bed and journal. She continued to write until she fell asleep. Then she started to write affirmations, declaring God's grace and how He has a plan for her, over and over, writing Jeremiah 29:11 more than 200 times. Not only was she declaring it by writing in her journal over and over, she read it every morning for the next 2 weeks. The next morning, she noticed she was a lot more excited about the days to come. She was expecting good things to happen to her in her future. She knew if she kept her dad's advice in the back of her head, God first and in her heart, she could conquer anything and everything. The preacher was blasting gospel music, which woke up the entire house. Her younger brother Blake came busting into her room with an annoyed look on his face. She looked at him, then looked at the door. You don't knock? Brooklyn said, a slight attitude in her voice. Why is he blasting that music so loud and early on a Saturday? He complained. Brooklyn shrugged her shoulders, getting up to start her day. She and her brother normally would go to the mall, then to Cascades Park, which was a newly built park with a walking trail, waterfalls, a huge stage, and a restaurant. It was a nice little park they went to with their friends to walk around, talk, and play on the stage. They both got ready to head out of the house to do their normal Saturday routine. They headed to pick up Blake's girlfriend and Brooklyn's girlfriend. This was a secret between Blake and Brooklyn, or at least she thought it was. They headed to the mall and afterward to the park. They walked and talked for hours. The preacher always called around 9:30 p.m. to make sure they were heading back soon for church in the morning. This was the only time Blake and Brooklyn could be together and have a little fun before he would call over and over just to see where and what they were doing. They could just be driving around the small town and still get 1,000 calls asking what they were doing. Brooklyn was in college. Blake was a freshman in high school. You would think they would have a little more freedom, but they didn't. They both talked very strongly about their feelings to each other, but when it came to their parents, it was hard getting through. They treat us like kids, Blake said, hitting the back of the seat.